Right now, somewhere, a person's blood pressure is spiking by as much as 20 points. Their pupils are dilating, and their blood is measurably thickening, all within 2 seconds of a single provoking sentence. And research suggests anger may be the fastest, most physically total emotional response the human body is capable of producing. Zoom in past the clenched jaw, past the tightened fists, down to the locus ceruleus, a small blue-tinted cluster of neurons in the brainstem that acts as the brain's central alarm dispatcher. Neuroscientists have found that when this structure activates, it floods the entire brain with norepinephrine within a fraction of a second, essentially hijacking every other neural process to prioritize a single objective: confront the threat immediately. Scientists believe this is why rational thought seems to vanish the instant real anger arrives, because chemically, it briefly does. This is where physics and biology intersect precisely. The mechanism is called the sympathoadrenal medullary response. Within moments of a triggering event, the hypothalamus signals the adrenal medulla to release a combined surge of adrenaline and noradrenaline directly into the bloodstream. The American Heart Association has documented that this surge elevates heart rate, constricts certain blood vessels while dilating others, and increases blood clotting factors, a set of changes that evolved to prepare the body for potential physical injury. This is not a mood. It is a coordinated cardiovascular event, and researchers have noted it is measurable in blood chemistry within under a minute of onset. Most explanations of anger stop at count to 10. A 7-minute doctor's visit rarely has time to explain what is actually happening in the blood and brain during that count. And most wellness advice treats anger as a discipline problem rather than a physiological one. But research suggests the real architecture of anger runs through at least 5 interconnected systems, each with a distinct timeline, and understanding them changes how survivable and how useful the emotion actually becomes. The first mechanism is amygdala prefrontal disconnection. Neuroimaging studies suggest that during intense anger, communication between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, the brain's centers for threat detection and rational judgment, respectively, becomes measurably weaker. Some researchers describe this as a temporary amygdala hijack, a term used to describe the brain state in which emotional response outpaces and overrides deliberate reasoning, sometimes for several minutes at a stretch. The second mechanism is testosterone and cortisol crosstalk. Research suggests that anger involves a distinct hormonal signature compared to fear or anxiety. While cortisol remains elevated, some studies indicate testosterone can rise simultaneously in both men and women during anger, a combination associated with increased confrontational behavior. Scientists believe this dual hormonal signature may be part of why anger, unlike fear, often produces an urge to move toward a perceived threat rather than away from it. The third mechanism is cardiovascular strain, specifically. Research published through the American Heart Association indicates that episodes of intense anger are associated with a measurable, temporary increase in the risk of cardiac events within the 2 hours immediately following the episode, an effect attributed to the combination of elevated blood pressure, increased heart rate, and heightened blood clotting factors occurring simultaneously. The fourth mechanism is the vagal withdrawal response. Normally, the vagus nerve acts as a brake on heart rate and arousal. Studies suggest that during anger, vagal activity drops sharply, effectively releasing that brake and allowing the sympathetic nervous system's activating signals to dominate unopposed. This is part of why anger can feel like acceleration, with no ability to slow down, even when a person consciously wants to calm themselves. The fifth mechanism is glutamate surge in the prefrontal cortex. Research indicates that intense anger is associated with a spike in glutamate, the brain's primary excitatory neurotransmitter, in regions responsible for impulse control. Some scientists believe this transient excitatory surge may temporarily impair the very brain regions needed to regulate the anger response, creating a brief window in which impulsive decisions become measurably more likely. Here's a way to picture these 5 mechanisms together. Imagine your nervous system as a car with 2 pedals and 1 set of hands on the wheel. Anger floors the accelerator through adrenaline and testosterone, while simultaneously cutting the brake line through vagal withdrawal, and briefly blinds the driver, the prefrontal cortex, by fogging the windshield with excess glutamate. The car doesn't malfunction. It's doing precisely what a survival-oriented vehicle was built to do in the presence of a threat. The danger is simply that modern triggers rarely require the vehicle to move at all. Here's where age changes the picture in ways rarely discussed. After 55, research suggests the cardiovascular system becomes more sensitive to the blood pressure spikes anger produces, meaning the same anger response that was merely uncomfortable at 30 can carry meaningfully greater cardiac risk later in life. At the same time, some studies indicate that emotional regulation circuitry in the prefrontal cortex, when exercised over decades, can actually become more efficient with age in many people. Meaning, while the body's risk from anger rises, the brain's ability to de-escalate it, with practice, often improves. After all this biology, the actionable insight is almost disarmingly small. A 20-second physical pause before responding. Research suggests that the acute hormonal surge driving intense anger begins to measurably decline within roughly 20 to 90 seconds if no further provoking input occurs. Meaning brief physical delay, stepping back, staying silent, allows the sympathoadrenal surge to begin its natural decline before a response is spoken or acted on. But here's what almost no one knows about what happens next, and this may be the most useful part of this entire episode. Research suggests that repeatedly acting on anger in the heat of the moment appears to strengthen, not weaken, the neural pathway connecting provocation to explosive response, essentially training the brain toward faster escalation over time. Conversely, studies indicate that consistently pausing before responding appears to strengthen the competing prefrontal pathway, gradually raising the threshold required to trigger the same intensity of reaction. Anger, in this sense, is trainable in either direction, depending entirely on which pathway gets used more often. There's a sixth mechanism worth naming, the gut-brain inflammatory link. Research suggests chronic, frequent anger is associated with elevated inflammatory markers, similar to those seen in prolonged stress. And some studies indicate this systemic inflammation may itself lower the threshold for future anger responses, creating a feedback loop between the body's inflammatory state and its emotional reactivity. There is a seventh mechanism connecting to genetics, epigenetic modulation of the MAOA gene, sometimes informally referenced in research discussing aggression regulation. Some studies suggest variations in how this gene is expressed, potentially influenced by early life stress through epigenetic mechanisms, may partially account for individual differences in anger reactivity, though researchers caution this remains an area of active and still developing study, not a fixed predictor of behavior. There is an eighth mechanism worth understanding, mitochondrial cost. As with grief and anxiety, research suggests repeated, intense anger responses place measurable metabolic demand on cellular energy systems, and some studies indicate frequent anger activation is associated with greater reported fatigue, even independent of physical exertion, the cost of running a full-body alarm system repeatedly throughout a single day. There is a ninth mechanism concerning memory encoding specifically. Research suggests the same norepinephrine surge that characterizes anger also enhances memory consolidation, meaning angry moments are often encoded with unusually vivid, long-lasting detail. Scientists believe this is an evolutionary feature, not a flaw. Remembering exactly what provoked a survival-level response would have had clear advantages, even though today it can mean old arguments remain disproportionately vivid decades later. There is a 10th mechanism, often overlooked, facial feedback. Studies suggest that the physical act of holding an angry facial expression, a furrowed brow, tightened jaw, sends sensory signals back to the brain that can reinforce and sustain the emotional state itself. Meaning the face is not simply expressing anger, but actively participating in maintaining it. Taken together, these 10 mechanisms describe something worth sitting with. Anger is not a moral failing or a loss of control. It is a fast, coordinated, full-body survival response, built with remarkable precision, that briefly prioritizes action over reflection. And research increasingly suggests that with repeated, deliberate practice, the balance between those two forces can be measurably retrained. It's important to say clearly, this science is shared to help you understand the real, physical mechanics of anger, not to diagnose or replace professional care. And if anger feels frequent, intense, or difficult to manage, speaking with a doctor or licensed mental health professional remains the right next step, since general science communication like this can never substitute for individualized care. Now, zoom out as far as physics allows. The same electrical principles governing the norepinephrine racing through your neurons in anger govern the static charge building in storm clouds before lightning strikes. Anger, at its core, is simply energy in motion, obeying the same universal laws as every other form of energy in the cosmos. And the remarkable thing is not that this energy exists, but that a species capable of feeling it has also, through the very brain region anger briefly overrides, learned how to choose what to do with it. If this changed how you think about a feeling you've carried for years, send it to someone who needs to hear that their anger isn't a character flaw, it's ancient biology, doing exactly what it was built to do, and it's entirely capable of being retrained. Because here's the question worth carrying with you until next time. If the same 20 seconds of pause can begin retraining a lifetime of reaction, what would change if you gave yourself that pause the very next time it mattered? That's where we're headed next.